Most people believe they understand others. They trust their instincts. They assume they can recognize sincerity, confidence, kindness. But Nietzsche offered a far more unsettling thought. What we see in people is rarely who they are. It is who they feel they must appear to be. And once that idea settles in, social life changes. You begin to sense layers beneath tone. You begin to hear tension beneath words. You begin to notice that personality often behaves like armor. And then the real question arises. If everyone is protecting something, what are they protecting? Nietzsche believed that human behavior is not random. It is organized around a central psychological drive he called the will to power. Not political domination, not control in the obvious sense, but something subtler, the need to feel significant, to feel secure, to avoid feeling small. Every interaction, he suggested, contains this quiet negotiation. How do I protect my ego here? How do I maintain my position? How do I avoid losing status, relevance, control? Once you understand this, conversations stop feeling casual. They become signals. An interruption may not be impatience. It may be anxiety about losing attention. Boasting may not be pride. It may be fear of invisibility. Criticism may not be clarity. It may be a shield. And suddenly, you're not just hearing words. You're hearing defenses. So pause and ask, what is this person trying not to feel right now? Nietzsche understood something modern psychology quietly confirms. The ego is fragile. It requires reassurance. It resists humiliation. It flinches at perceived threat. So people perform, not maliciously, not consciously, but instinctively. They amplify certain traits. They conceal others. They curate impressions, not because they are deceitful, but because something inside them feels exposed. Once you begin noticing this, patterns emerge. The person obsessed with status often fears irrelevance. The person obsessed with moral superiority often fears chaos. The person obsessed with appearing intelligent often fears exposure. These aren't accusations. They're compensations. And when reassurance is threatened, reactions follow. Sometimes subtly a tightened smile. Sometimes aggressively raised voice, sharper tone. Sometimes passive-aggressively silence as punishment. But rarely randomly. So ask yourself gently, when someone reacts strongly, what identity just felt endangered? There is a quiet cost to seeing people this way. You begin noticing when laughter is slightly forced, when agreement comes too quickly, when someone attacks with just a little too much intensity. You sense tension in posture, urgency in tone, control in correction, and social life feels less spontaneous, more transparent. You realize most interactions are not battles of logic. They are negotiations of identity. But Nietzsche did not advise cynicism. He warned against naivete, not compassion. Understanding human drives is not about despising people. It is about recognizing that nearly everyone is trying, in their own imperfect way, to feel whole. So reflect honestly. Does seeing defense in others make you colder or clearer? The most uncomfortable insight Nietzsche offers is this. The same force you detect in others lives in you. You also defend identity. You also seek recognition. You also avoid feeling small. You correct to feel competent. You explain to feel understood. You argue to avoid invisibility. Reading people begins with reading yourself. Because the moment you become aware of your own will to power, you stop projecting it blindly. And something shifts. You stop arguing to win. You stop explaining to control perception. You stop correcting to dominate. You begin observing instead. And observation creates distance. Distance creates clarity. Clarity creates freedom. So ask yourself, when I react strongly, what part of me is protecting itself? Here is where Nietzsche becomes liberating. When you understand that most anger hides fear, you stop absorbing it as an attack. When you recognize that arrogance hides insecurity, you stop feeling intimidated. When you see that dominance often hides fragility, you stop competing unconsciously. You no longer personalize every reaction. You interpret it. And that subtle shift changes everything. Reading people instantly is not about spotting micro-expressions. It's about spotting tension. What are they defending? Status? Competence? Moral identity? Belonging? The answer is almost always visible if you're calm enough to see it. And calm requires something rare, distance from your own ego. So consider, can you observe without needing to win? Most people are too busy surviving to analyze motives. They respond instantly, emotionally, habitually. Depth requires distance, and distance requires courage. Because once you see the invisible dance of ego protection happening beneath conversations, you have a choice. Participate unconsciously, or step out. When you step out, arguments lose urgency. Validation loses urgency. Being right loses urgency. You respond instead of react. You listen instead of counter. You observe instead of compete. And suddenly, you're not just reading people. You're understanding the human condition. And that understanding softens you. Not because you become passive, but because you become aware. Nietzsche's insight is unsettling but freeing. Everyone is protecting something, including you. Once you recognize that, you stop taking things personally. And when you stop taking things personally, you stop being manipulated emotionally. The will to power exists in all of us. But awareness gives you choice. You can compete unconsciously or observe consciously. And the moment you begin observing, you don't just read people better. You see through illusion. You see through defense. You see through performance. And perhaps most importantly, you see yourself. So here is the final question. When you look at someone's behavior today, will you judge it? Or will you ask what they are protecting?